Thanks for staying tuned to Channels Television. This is Network Africa. Coming up on the program, South Africa plays the waiting game as official results for yesterday's local elections are about to be announced. Then confusion in Boko Haram as Boubacar Shekau allegedly says he remains the leader of the sect. And we look at how students in South Sudan strive for education in the midst of the crisis. We're glad you could join us on Network Africa. I'm Cynthia Are. South Africa's August the 3rd local elections was seen as one of the most keenly contested polls in recent years. It pitched the ruling African National Congress, ANC, against the leading opposition Democratic Alliance, also known as DA, and the Third Force Economic Freedom Fighters, known as EFF, led by former ANC youth leader Julius Malema. Results from the Independent Electoral Commission have been trickling in from different parts of the country, even as vote counting continues in other places. Joining us to fill us in on how the waiting game is going is Channels Television South Africa Bureau Chief, Betty Dibia. Betty, thank you very much for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Now, we understand that about 60% of the votes are in. Is that actually the case?
Yeah, it may as well be that or more. Counting began last night, right after voting, and so and it's still going on. Some areas, of course, have more registered voters, like Johannesburg, which has over 2 million, registered voters. But the counting is still going on, so we don't really have a clear picture of it could still go anywhere. And then we have those like the EFF who are spoiling to be kingmakers, to go into alliances with other winners who agree to their terms, as they say.
Well, Betty, based on what you're hearing right now as regards the results that might be in from various municipalities, is the ANC leading?
We understand that the ANC, regarding number of votes, is leading. But as I said earlier, the picture is so far from clear at this moment. It goes beyond the number of votes and the number of municipalities that you win. So we're looking at we expect a press conference from the Chief Electoral Officer in about an hour, so we'll know where we really are. But everybody is being so careful because anything we've been warned. There's so many false figures, so many false results being mentioned on social media. So everyone is being careful. Let's see where this is all going. It's still not clear, where it's all going. But one thing is clear. The DA has definitely grown, and the ANC, as a divided house in some parts, some provinces, has definitely been hurt in some areas. And yeah, that's it. And with the breakaway of Julius Malema, who now has, or the existence of the EFF has definitely hurt the ANC as well.
Well, Betty, one of the reports which we heard earlier on that actually was quite ironic was that Nkandla voted to stay with the ANC, and now I think that's been retracted. Do we know the status of that, especially considering the scandal as regards President Jacob Zuma?
Well, Nkandla is in KwaZulu-Natal, and KwaZulu-Natal is also, apart from the ANC, is also a stronghold for the Inkatha Freedom Party, that's the IFP. So the confirmation we have is that the IFP has won that municipality, which is where the president's country home, the Nkandla that we hear all about, is. That's the confirmation we have. But there's so many things at play there. There was another party which broke away from the IFP, which is the NFP. They didn't meet the deadline to pay to be part of this election. It's led by a woman who was ill for some time. She did quite well in the national election, but this time, with the absence of the NFP, the IFP grew a bit stronger there. That's why they capitalize on that to make that impact. But we have the confirmation that IFP actually won that municipality, Nkandla municipality.
Well, Betty, you filled us. I'm sorry to interrupted you there. I thought you were done. But Betty, you filled us in that in 1 hour we might expect the official results to be announced. But at this point, we're actually quite keen as regards police presence. We know that was one of the major contributing factors for the elections being quite peaceful. Is there still heavy police presence, just in case the results actually spark some, or press a few buttons that might trigger some protests?
Yes, I wouldn't say heavy police presence everywhere. But some trouble spots, you still have a police presence. Yeah, I'm sure you've been hearing of Vuani. There, yesterday, the bulk of that area, because of demarcation issues, remember, over 20 schools were burnt in that area because they were being joined to another place they didn't want to belong to. They didn't vote. Those people, and we heard of intimidation in that area. For those who wanted to vote, they had a football march and stuff like that. But there is police presence, of course, to ensure that there's peace. Votes are still being counted. Mm-hmm. So there's police presence, but not heavy police presence, as you say. Yes. But trouble spots, of course, you still have police.
Well, Betty, thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa. We're very glad that you could.
Thank you.
Now, hopefully there will be no protests in South Africa, but that's not the case in Zimbabwe, where hundreds of protesters marched on the streets of Harare amid anger over President Robert Mugabe's government's handling of the economy. Anti-riot police used batons to break up the peaceful march in Zimbabwe's capital on Wednesday. That's the latest public protest against President Robert Mugabe's government.
Hundreds of people marched in the streets of Harare against the government's plans to introduce local banknotes as authorities grapple with a serious shortage of dollars. Police kept watch and the marchers presented a petition at Ministry of Finance offices in the center of the city.
We are graduates, we work hard, but still we suffer. We suffer because we have few people that are so greedy that they take everything that belongs to us.
We're demonstrating against the bond notes. We don't want the bond notes because it actually will lead to further corruption and total devaluation of the currency.
Demonstrators denounced Mugabe, accusing his ruling ZANU-PF party of failing to create up to 2.2 million jobs that it had promised when campaigning during the 2013 presidential vote, which Mugabe won amid opposition charges of rigging.
Actually, as a peaceful citizen, I'm not happy with the reaction by the state. We're actually demonstrating peacefully. There's nothing wrong about what we're doing. We're just carrying out our views, and they decided to intervene violently.
Zimbabwe has witnessed several anti-government protests in recent months, including the biggest stay-at-home demonstration by activist pastor Ivan Mawarire's #This Flag movement in July. 92-year-old Mugabe, who's been in power since independence from Britain in 1980, is increasingly under pressure from angry Zimbabweans, as well as his war veteran allies, who last month rebuked him as a manipulative dictator, calling on him to step down.
Well, just like our South Africa bureau chief told you earlier on, in the next hour we should be seeing the results for the South Africa local elections, which held yesterday. About 60% of the votes are in, and we ask you to stay tuned to Channels Television for that. Still to come on Network Africa. There's confusion in the midst of the Boko Haram sect as Abubakar Shekau allegedly says he remains the leader